By sunrise, Caracas was quiet. Too quiet. The streets, usually humming with commerce and chatter, were empty. Shutters rattled in the wind. A single streetlight flickered, then died. No one expected what came next. A convoy of black SUVs appeared, moving like shadows. The engines hummed low. Somewhere, a door slammed. A man whispered, almost to himself. They shouldn't be here, not yet. But the real story hadn't even started. Inside one of those SUVs sat a figure. Not just a politician. Not just a strategist. Someone who understood how influence moved silently across borders. He wasn't young. Not old either. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, faint but sharp enough to tell a story. A story of someone who had survived a misstep in Miami once, and never forgotten it. His fingers tapped the edge of a dossier. Maps. Reports. Secret cables. All pointing to a country on the edge. A country whose next move no one could predict. He leaned back. Closed his eyes. And thought. Everything we've built, everything we've pushed, it's about to be tested. The convoy turned sharply. A market square appeared ahead. Shutters rolled up slowly. Vendors peeked out, sensing something was off. A boy dropped his soccer ball. A dog barked. And somewhere, a radio crackled. Phase 1, in motion. But something in him was shifting. A thought he couldn't shake. This isn't just politics anymore. It's a reckoning. Back on the highway, the SUVs vanished into the morning fog. The city returned to silence. Yet shadows lingered. And there, in a high-rise office across the city, a journalist stared at a blinking screen. Emails, intercepted calls, tips, each one more confusing than the last. There's a pattern here, she muttered. But it's hiding behind the noise. You've felt this before. That sudden gut twist when you realize the rules aren't what you thought. The story you believed in, might have been rewritten. At a cafe near the harbor, a retired general sipped coffee. He didn't look up when the news ticker ran. He already knew. Or at least, he thought he did. Power doesn't knock, he said softly. It creeps. And when it strikes, everyone wonders why they never saw it coming. The lights flickered. A child's laughter echoed somewhere in the distance. A door clicked shut. And somewhere between the shadows and the dawn. The strategy, whispered in corridors far from view, had begun to unfold. But the real story hadn't even started. He wasn't born for this world. At least, not the one he had built. A small town in Florida, 1970s. Suburban streets, children racing bicycles, dogs barking in the heat. He was 10 years old the first time he realized rules weren't fair. He had scraped his knee chasing a baseball. A teacher had scolded him, not the other boy who pushed him. Something inside him snapped. I'll make sure no one pushes me again, he whispered. It was a simple vow, almost childish. But it became a blueprint. He carried it through college, through late-night diners with flickering neon signs, across highways that stretched like veins across the country. He learned early the language of systems, how money moved, how whispers became policy, how influence could be invisible yet absolute. And he hid his fear behind certainty. No one knew the nights he spent staring at ceiling cracks, wondering if the next decision would be his last mistake. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already built a small empire of ideas. Not one built on law alone. Not one built on loyalty alone. But on anticipation. Reading people. Predicting moves before they appeared on the board. Yet there was a contradiction. He wanted control. He craved it. But he feared it too. Late-night TV showed him a world spinning without pause. Factory floors, city lights, diners, he saw patterns in everything. And he learned to exploit them. But sometimes, in the quiet hours, he wondered. Am I creating a future, or a trap? You know this feeling. The pulse in your chest when you realize you're both the architect and the prisoner of your own ambition. A mentor once told him. Power is like a mirror. You see what you want. And what you refuse to see. He remembered that line during long flights over Latin America. Venezuela appeared below, a mosaic of hope, struggle, and unrest. He understood immediately, it wasn't just another country on a map. It was a test. A reflection of what his strategy could achieve, or destroy. But something in him was shifting. A detail he hadn't accounted for. A variable too human to ignore. The night before the convoy moved, he sat alone in a hotel overlooking Caracas. The city lights shimmered on the water. He traced patterns on the glass with his fingertip. And thought. What if they see it coming? What if this entire plan unravels because of one misstep? There was one detail everyone missed. A minor official, a clerical error, a single conversation overheard in a market. Small things. But history is made of small things. At the cafe downstairs, a barista served him black coffee. He didn't smile. But he noticed her hands. Quick. Efficient. Caring. She reminded him of someone he once lost. Somewhere, in the maze of decisions and power, a fragment of humanity remained. And in that fragment, the first cracks began to spread quietly. Because no matter how carefully you plot, the human element is unpredictable. And in the end, it's always the human element that tells the real story. But he didn't know it yet. At first, everything looked normal. Meetings. Reports. Calls. The kind of days that feel ordinary, until they're not. In a conference room somewhere between Miami and Caracas, the screens flickered. Maps of the region. Routes. Economic data. A single red dot pulsed. He didn't need a brief. He knew what it meant. The plan was moving too fast. Or maybe, too slow. No one could tell anymore. An advisor spoke up. The president expects results by the end of the week. His voice was calm, but there was an edge, something he didn't say. A hidden truth hovering in the air. But he noticed it. The first contradiction. The reports, they're incomplete, he muttered. And everyone froze. For a moment, the room felt like a trap. The air heavy with unsaid fears. Outside, Caracas throbbed quietly. A city unaware it had become a chessboard. At first, the reports looked normal. Then a single detail fractured everything. An unexpected shipment. A name he didn't recognize. A route that wasn't supposed to exist. He leaned forward. Fingers pressed to the table. Someone's changing the rules, he said. Not as accusation. As realization. Across the hallway, a journalist typed furiously. Her instincts told her something was off. Patterns didn't lie. But the world was always loud, chaotic, noisy. She had to find the signal in the static. And here's the part almost no one saw. Every move he had made, every calculation, was now vulnerable. Not to enemies. Not even to rivals. But to the unpredictable. The variable of human desire, error, and fear. Screens lit up. Messages pinged. Reports collided with intelligence. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And the moral pressure built. Decisions that once felt calculated now teetered on the edge of consequence. A wrong call. A delay. A whisper of dissent. All capable of toppling years of strategy. You can't control everything, someone said quietly. He didn't answer. He knew. But control was the only thing that mattered. Outside, a market erupted in protest. Small at first. A merchant shouting. A car horn blaring. But it spread like wildfire. He watched it all unfold on screens, remote cameras. And realized the truth. The danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. You've seen this before. That moment when the rules you trusted dissolve. When what you thought was safe becomes the threat. The convoy paused. A roadblock, unexpected. A man waved a paper. A detail no one anticipated. And the plan stalled. The figure leaned back in his chair. Eyes narrowing. Calculating. And whispered. This isn't about winning. It's about knowing the next move before anyone else does. At that moment, the pattern shifted. The narrative that had seemed straightforward, fractured. Every ally, every enemy, every unknown now mattered. And somewhere, in the noise, a small truth emerged. What you control is fragile. What you influence is fleeting. But he didn't stop. Because in chaos, the strategist thrives. And in the streets below, Caracas kept moving. Unaware. Unforgiving. Waiting for the next turn. But the real reckoning hadn't even started. They called it a strategy. He called it a map of influence. Behind closed doors, the real plan was never written in memos. It existed in whispers, in invisible connections. In the places no one dared look. And here's the part almost no one saw. Every move he made had a ripple. Not a ripple of chaos. But of quiet dependency. A network of small favors, subtle pressures, and carefully timed signals. Venezuela wasn't just a country on a board. It was a laboratory. Every decision measured. Every reaction logged. Every belief tested. You think they're free, he said to no one in particular. They're controlled. Curated. Every choice, an illusion of autonomy. Outside, Caracas breathed. Children ran through alleys, unaware. Vendors called their wares, oblivious. Life went on, ordinary. And yet, it was all part of the system. A minor official somewhere had signed a permit. A shipment cleared with a subtle wink. A media outlet ran a story, just enough to distract. And in combination, it created a pressure wave invisible to most. But the paradox was simple. The more freedom people believed they had, the more dependent they became. He traced it on a glass board. Lines connecting dots only he could see. Circles and arrows, creating a pattern. A truth most ignored. Control doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And the emotional shock. He knew it, and he didn't care. Because history rewarded those who saw the system, not the spectacle. You can hide behind virtue. Behind protest. Behind outrage. He paused, eyes on the maps. But reality isn't waiting for your morality to catch up. Somewhere, in a cafe, the journalist had pieced together fragments of this network. Emails. Phone taps. Leaked reports. Her heart pounded. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is a machine. And we're all part of it. The lights flickered. A glass clinked on the counter. Somewhere, a siren wailed. And the system revealed its paradox. Those who thought they resisted were the very gears that kept it turning. Those who screamed for freedom were dancing to a tune they didn't hear. He walked past the windows, city lights reflecting off the glass. In the distance, a protest flickered. Not large. Not violent. But alive. A reminder that even the most precise system could not fully predict humanity. And yet, the logic remained undeniable. Every move, calculated. Every variable accounted for, almost. Because there is always one factor that eludes even the sharpest strategist. Human unpredictability. Emotion. Fear. Desire. And that's where the real tension began. The strategy was elegant. The execution, flawless. But the story wasn't his alone. In Caracas, a child laughed. A street vendor argued with a customer. A guard blinked, distracted by a memory. And in that small, ordinary chaos, the system faltered. Just slightly. Just enough. But enough to reveal the truth. What they called freedom was quiet dependency. What they called control was curated chaos. And somewhere, deep in his mind, he realized. Even the most invisible hand casts a shadow. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. The strategist watched it unfold from the high rise. Numbers, signals, protests. All colliding in ways that even he hadn't predicted. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. Somewhere below, a crowd had gathered. Not large, not violent, just persistent. Signs held high. Eyes searching for answers. He leaned back. The weight pressed on his chest. Every decision, every calculation was suddenly fragile. In the control room, an analyst whispered. They're reacting faster than anticipated. The storm wasn't outside. It was inside. Inside the corridors of power. Inside the minds of those who thought they were untouchable. A minor official refused an order. A shipment was delayed. A report contradicted itself. And the first ripple became a wave. You've asked this question too, he thought. What if the system I built collapses under its own logic? The city outside mirrored it. Car horns, shouted arguments, flickering streetlights. Chaos, subtle but undeniable. He saw it clearly now. This wasn't just about strategy. It was about identity. Who he was. What he had become. And the awakening hit him with a quiet, relentless force. Even the best laid plans could not anticipate human unpredictability. Desire. Fear. Hope. All mingling in a way no algorithm could predict. A reporter, somewhere in a cafe, typed rapidly. This isn't about politics. It's about people. You've felt this before. That moment when the world tilts just enough to remind you that control is an illusion. A security guard dropped his keys. A door slammed. Someone laughed, nervously. Every pulse, every sound, every flicker of light became a signal. And he understood, finally. Even the shadows carry consequences. The storm surged. Inside the strategist's mind, every certainty unraveled. The rules had changed. The pattern shifted. But in that unraveling, a paradox emerged. The chaos that threatened to destroy him was also the spark that made him see. To understand. To awaken. He closed his eyes. Breathed in the tension. And whispered. You can't stop a mind that finally decides to question. You can't contain the storm of realization. Outside, Caracas pulsed with life. Every street. Every corner. Every soul, unknowingly part of the awakening. And somewhere, above the city, the strategist realized. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was about seeing clearly. About understanding the fragile balance between power and humanity. Screens flashed. Messages collided. And somewhere, the first truth began to pierce the chaos. Control is temporary. Awareness is eternal. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to see? And maybe, this is where everything begins again. Dawn arrived quietly. The city exhaled. Caracas moved, not as a battlefield, but as a living organism, waking from a restless night. Street vendors opened their stalls. Children chased soccer balls across cracked sidewalks. Somewhere, a dog barked. And in the distance, a bus rumbled to life. He sat alone in the high-rise. The storm of the night still echoed in his mind. Every choice, every misstep, every ripple had left its mark. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You know this feeling. The one that hits after chaos, when silence finally arrives. When the dust settles, and you see what remains. He looked at the maps, the reports, the blinking screens that now seemed almost gentle in their inactivity. The system had endured. But not untouched. Not invincible. And somewhere in that imperfection, there was hope. A journalist typed her final note for the day. Her hands paused over the keyboard. She breathed. This isn't about politics. It's about people, she wrote again. And for the first time, she believed it. Outside, a retired general sipped coffee. The morning sun caught the lines of his face. He had seen strategy, power, and chaos before. And he knew, quietly. Every moment carries a lesson. Every human flaw, a compass. The strategist stood. For the first time, he allowed himself a pause. To reflect. To acknowledge the cracks in the plan. And the sparks of insight they had revealed. Somewhere, across the city, a child laughed. A market erupted in ordinary arguments. A door opened. The world moved on. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? Even in the darkest night, there is a flicker of light. Even in the most calculated system, there is unpredictability. Even in power, there is humanity. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. The city hummed softly. A quiet symphony of resilience, curiosity, and life. Screens went dark. Reports lay untouched. And somewhere, in the strategist's mind, a new question took root. What now? And for once, he didn't have an answer. By mid-morning, Caracas was moving again. But the calm was deceptive. Something had shifted. Something almost invisible. He watched from the high rise. The city below seemed ordinary. Cars honking. Street vendors shouting. Children running. Life in motion. But he knew better. A single intercepted message had arrived overnight. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Just a few words. But words that rewrote the morning. Change is closer than it appears. He read it twice. Then 3 times. A detail everyone else would have ignored. Was now the thread holding the next domino. At first, it looked like a clerical error. A misrouted shipment. A name misplaced in a report. Nothing significant. Nothing alarming. But he noticed the pattern. The subtle repetition. The micro-shifts in behavior. The slight adjustments that, in total, made a universe of difference. You've seen this before. The moment when a small detail suddenly transforms everything. At a cafe near the harbor, the journalist traced the same thread. Emails, intercepted calls, whispers from insiders. She tapped her pen nervously. There's a system here, she murmured. But it's operating behind a mask. And everyone is dancing to it, unknowingly. He leaned back in his chair. The weight of anticipation pressed on him. Every variable accounted for, except one. The human element. Unpredictable. Irrational. Uncontainable. Outside, a convoy moved again. Same streets. Same vehicles. But the rules had changed. One guard was absent. One checkpoint delayed. And the timing, subtly off. The microhooks spread quietly. Ripples no one could anticipate. Every intended outcome was now questioned. And in the control room, he realized the paradox. The system he built to predict chaos was now entangled in it. The city responded in unexpected ways. Vendors argued. A dog barked. Streetlights flickered. You can't control everything, he whispered. And yet, you try anyway. But in that attempt to control, he saw clarity. The flaws. The truths hidden beneath the surface. The beauty and danger of unpredictability. A minor official refused an order. The shipment rerouted itself through channels no one noticed. The crowd in the square swelled, not out of anger, but curiosity. And suddenly, everything fractured. Not violently. Not loudly. Quietly. Insidiously. He traced it on his maps. Lines intersected in ways they shouldn't. Arrows collided. Dots blinked red. At that moment, he understood. The system, for all its elegance, was alive. Not just machinery. Not just strategy. Humanity had seeped into the design. And it was reshaping it from within. The storm had returned. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was everywhere. And for the first time, he wondered. What if I'm not controlling the story? What if the story is controlling me? The lights flickered. A siren wailed. Somewhere, a door clicked shut. And Caracas waited. Silent. Watching. But the real reckoning hadn't even begun. By noon, the city had transformed. Ordinary streets held extraordinary tension. Shutters rattled. Engines idled. Every pedestrian carried a question they couldn't voice. He watched it all from the high rise. A single cup of coffee in front of him. Cold. Neglected. And yet, the pulse of the city kept him alert. The emails arrived in bursts. Each one a subtle shift. A name changed. A route altered. A shipment delayed. Nothing anyone else would notice, but enough to bend reality. At first, it seemed like coincidence. Then a pattern emerged. A pattern that contradicted every prediction he had made. You've asked this question too. What happens when the rules you built no longer apply? A minor official somewhere refused an order. The convoy stalled. A guard questioned his instructions. Nothing dramatic, yet everything mattered. And here's the part almost no one saw. The system, for all its precision, was unraveling quietly. Not because of enemies. Not because of rivals. But because of humanity itself. A vendor argued over the price of fruit. A child laughed in a courtyard. Someone knocked over a stack of crates. Small events. Insignificant. Yet, monumental. In the control room, he traced the changes. Dots blinking. Lines intersecting. Arrows pointing in impossible directions. The real danger, he muttered, is not chaos, but the human hand that refuses to follow expectation. Outside, protesters gathered. Not large. Not violent. Persistent. Curious. Unpredictable. A journalist typed furiously. Her notes a mosaic of observation, instinct, and fragmented truth. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is a living organism. And we are part of it. You've seen this before. The moment when certainty slips away. When control fractures. And everything you assumed was reliable, suddenly isn't. He leaned back in his chair. Breathing shallow. Heart ticking fast. For the first time, he felt exposed. Not to an enemy. Not to failure. But to the unpredictable nature of people. And then, a subtle signal arrived. A single phone call. A voice, calm but urgent. They're moving faster than we thought. The microhooks rippled. Every intended outcome questioned. Every calculation in doubt. And the paradox struck him fully. The very system designed to anticipate chaos was being reshaped by it. The city responded in ways that were almost imperceptible. A streetlight flickered. A car horn blared. Someone shouted directions. But in that quiet chaos, a moral question emerged. What do we truly control? And what do we merely influence? He traced the lines on his map one last time. Arrows bent. Dots collided. Patterns dissolved. And in that dissolution, he saw it clearly. Control is an illusion. Perception is reality. And the human element is inevitable. The storm hadn't ended. It had only grown subtler. More insistent. And somewhere, deep within him, he realized the next move was no longer his to make. The lights flickered again. A dog barked. A door clicked shut. And Caracas waited. Silent. Watching. But the real reckoning hadn't even begun. Night fell, and Caracas exhaled differently this time. Not the soft hum of ordinary life. Not the steady rhythm of routine. But a pulse, uneasy, fractured, electric. He stood by the window, staring down at streets that seemed smaller from above. A city alive. But not as they thought. Behind the surface, the system moved with terrifying precision. Not loud. Not obvious. But unstoppable. A shipment rerouted. A message intercepted. A protest misdirected. Each small move perfectly engineered, yet unpredictable. And here's the part almost no one saw. The deeper pattern beneath the chaos. The invisible hands guiding events. Was not chaos itself. It was quiet orchestration. You've seen this before. The kind of truth that whispers in your ear. While the world remains oblivious. He traced the routes on a digital map. Dots blinked red. Lines curved and intersected. Arrows moved in ways that defied logic. The illusion of control, he muttered, is the most powerful weapon of all. Outside, a market erupted quietly. Voices overlapping. Footsteps clattering. A dog barked somewhere in an alley. A journalist scribbled notes in a dimly lit cafe. Fragments of intelligence, intercepted communications, whispers from insiders. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is a living system. And we are all nodes within it. He realized the paradox. Those who thought they resisted, were feeding the system. Those who believed they were free, were dependent on its structure. Even defiance became part of the machine. A minor official refused an order. A shipment rerouted itself through channels no one noticed. The pattern shifted imperceptibly. And the emotional shock hit him. Not the threat of failure. Not the exposure of the plan. But the recognition that even the most meticulous system cannot escape the human element. Fingers tapped the glass. Eyes narrowed. He whispered. What they call freedom is quiet dependency. What they call control is curated chaos. Outside, Caracas flickered. A streetlight buzzed. A child laughed. A vendor shouted. And in those ordinary details, the extraordinary was revealed. The system wasn't broken. It was alive. Responsive. Adaptive. He understood finally. Every small decision, every human choice, every moment of unpredictability. It wasn't a flaw. It was part of the logic. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city pulsed. And somewhere, in the quiet of his mind, he realized. Even the most invisible hand casts a shadow. Even the most calculated plan can be reshaped by life itself. But the real reckoning had not even started. By midnight, the city was alive in a way that felt dangerous. Not violent. Not chaotic. But aware. Caracas pulsed. Streetlights flickered. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Voices whispered in alleys, cafes, and plazas. He watched it all from the high rise. The strategist, once confident, now felt a subtle tremor in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. A minor official refused another order. A shipment rerouted itself. Signals overlapped and contradicted each other. The system he had built to predict chaos was now caught in it. You know this feeling. The pulse in your chest when certainty slips away. When the rules you trusted no longer apply. Outside, the crowd swelled. Not with violence. With attention. Curiosity. The spark of awakening. A journalist typed furiously in a cafe. Her fingers raced across the keyboard. "This isn't politics," she wrote. "This is people realizing they are part of a living system." The strategist felt it too. The storm wasn't outside. It was inside. Inside minds. Inside hearts. Inside the logic of the system he had thought unbreakable. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. Alarms whispered. And he realized the paradox. The very system designed to control was awakening those it sought to guide. A streetlight buzzed. A child laughed. A dog barked. A vendor shouted. Each small human action. A ripple too strong to ignore. He traced the lines on the map again. Dots blinking red. Arrows curving, intersecting, collapsing. And in that pattern, a truth revealed itself. Even the most meticulous system cannot escape humanity. And he, the architect of influence, felt the first weight of humility. Not defeat. Not fear. But the realization that control is never absolute. Outside, Caracas moved like a living organism. Unpredictable. Persistent. And beautiful in its defiance. The storm had reached its emotional peak. Identity, morality, power, all collided. Every calculation challenged. Every certainty questioned. He whispered to himself. The storm isn't here to break me. It's here to reveal me. Screens flickered. Engines hummed. The city waited. And somewhere, quietly, awakening had begun. But the true reckoning had not yet arrived. Morning light seeped through the cracks of Caracas. Not harsh. Not commanding. But patient. The city exhaled slowly. Shutters rolled up. Vendors called their wares. Children ran along cracked sidewalks, oblivious to the storm of the night before. He sat alone in the high rise. Coffee gone cold beside him. Eyes tracing the streets below. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet he knew better. You felt this before. That quiet after the chaos. When the world seems unchanged. But you know nothing is the same. The strategist reflected on the past hours. Every calculation, every plan, every subtle move. All tested. All revealed. The human element had shifted the system in ways he hadn't anticipated. A journalist in a cafe across town paused over her notes. She reread her own words. This isn't about politics. It's about people. And what they do, when they finally see clearly. The city itself became a metaphor. Flickering streetlights, overlapping voices, the smell of bread from a nearby bakery. All ordinary, yet all subtly altered by the unseen forces at work. He leaned back, allowing himself a long breath. The storm was over, for now. And in that pause, he understood something fundamental. Control is temporary. Perception is eternal. And yet, he knew the cycle was far from complete. Every calm hides the next wave. Every quiet carries the echo of what's coming. Outside, Caracas thrummed softly. Not chaotic. Not loud. But alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. The strategist traced invisible lines in the air, imagining moves yet to be made. One thought lingered, almost whispering. What will happen next? When the next ripple begins? And in that question, the city, the system, the people, all waited together. Because even in reflection, the story is never finished. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, the real reckoning hadn't even started. By late afternoon, Caracas felt restless. The air was heavy with something unseen. A market vendor dropped a crate. Footsteps echoed on cracked pavement. Engines hummed in the distance, low and deliberate. He watched from the high rise, tracing invisible lines across maps and reports. Every move made the night before had set off ripples. Small, imperceptible, yet cumulative. And here's the part almost no one noticed. Every minor disruption was feeding the system. Every human choice, protest, delay, hesitation, added a layer to the intricate network he had spent years building. A shipment was rerouted. A minor official defied instructions. Messages collided. The pattern shifted. No one could predict the next move. You think control is absolute, he whispered. But it's always an illusion. Even the smallest variable can rewrite the rules. Outside, a journalist documented the subtle chaos. A streetlight buzzed. A child laughed. A dog barked. Each ordinary sound now part of a complex equation. The tension built quietly. Not violent. Not dramatic. But insistent. And unavoidable. You've seen this before. That moment when the rules seem stable. And then crumble silently under the weight of life itself. He tapped the table. Traced the lines on the digital map. Arrows collided. Dots blinked red. And he realized. The human element was not a flaw. It was the force shaping every outcome. A minor official spoke out of turn. The convoy stalled. The city shifted imperceptibly. The storm wasn't over. It was evolving. Adapting. Growing smarter. And in that subtle chaos, he understood the paradox. The system he designed to control was learning to control itself. The lights flickered. Voices overlapped. A door clicked shut. And Caracas waited, patient and relentless. But the real reckoning hadn't even started. Night fell again, but Caracas felt different this time. Not darker. Not quieter. But alive in a way that demanded attention. He stood by the window, eyes tracing the streets below. Vendors closing stalls. Children hurrying home. Engines humming in the distance. Life seemed ordinary. But nothing was ordinary anymore. A shipment had vanished. An official went silent. Messages collided in a way that made no sense, until patterns emerged. And here's the part almost no one saw. The system wasn't just a plan. It was an organism. Responsive. Adaptive. Shaped by every human choice, every hesitation, every act of defiance. You call it control, he whispered. But control is just perception. In a cafe across town, a journalist reread her notes. Her pen hesitated over the page. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is the pulse of humanity, reflected in chaos. The paradox was clear. Those who thought they resisted were part of the very mechanism they opposed. Freedom and control intertwined. Dependency disguised as choice. Order masked as chaos. He traced the map again. Dots blinked red. Arrows curved impossibly. Patterns shifted. And in that shift, a subtle truth emerged. Even the most meticulous strategy cannot escape the unpredictability of life. A minor official acted contrary to instructions. A convoy altered its route. The city responded, quietly but unmistakably. He felt the pressure. Not from outside. Not from enemies. But from the living system itself. From people. From unpredictability. From the truth that even the most precise calculations are only temporary. You know this feeling. That moment when certainty slips. And you realize reality is larger than your control. Lights flickered. A child laughed. Footsteps echoed in an alley. The storm had returned. But now it was quieter. Subtler. More insistent. And he understood. The real danger isn't change. The real danger is believing you can define it. The city pulsed below. Unseen ripples. Invisible currents. And somewhere deep in his mind, he whispered. The system isn't broken. It's alive. And somewhere in Caracas, the people, unknowingly, had begun to learn the rhythm. But the reckoning hadn't even started. By midnight, the streets of Caracas whispered. Not with alarms. Not with chaos. But with anticipation. The strategist leaned against the glass. City lights reflected in his eyes. Ordinary life moved below. Vendors closing, children hurrying home, engines humming. And yet, he could feel the tension, almost tactile. A single misstep. A word spoken too soon. A shipment delayed. And suddenly, the balance shifted. You can't predict people, he muttered. You can only anticipate them. But anticipation had its limits. A minor official refused an order. A convoy stalled at an unexpected checkpoint. And the city responded. Quietly. Relentlessly. You've seen this before. The moment when control feels tangible. And slips through your fingers anyway. In a cafe, a journalist scribbled notes, her heart racing. She traced patterns invisible to most. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is the pulse of humanity in motion. The paradox was inescapable. Those who believed they were free were part of the system they thought to resist. Every act of defiance, every hesitation, fed the network, strengthened the plan, or unraveled it, sometimes all at once. He tapped the table. Lines and arrows on the digital map shifted before his eyes. Dots blinked red. Patterns collided. And he realized. Even the most calculated strategy cannot fully account for human unpredictability. Outside, the city moved with subtle rhythm. Streetlights buzzed. A dog barked. Footsteps echoed in alleys. The storm was no longer external. It had infiltrated minds. Morality, desire, fear, all collided inside the strategist himself. He whispered to no one. The danger isn't change. The danger is believing you can control it. And somewhere, quietly, the city adapted. Responded. Learned. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. A single phone call arrived. They're moving faster than anticipated. Microhooks rippled across the system. Every outcome questioned. Every certainty shaken. The strategist leaned back, breathing shallow. Not fear. Not defeat. Recognition. Acknowledgement of limits. And Caracas, pulsed below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. Because even in precision, the human element always finds a way. And the real reckoning hadn't even started. By the early hours, Caracas had become a living pulse. Not violent. Not chaotic. But aware. Every street. Every alley. Every flicker of light, vibrating with tension. He stood by the window, tracing the lines of the city below. Ordinary life. Yet fractured. Vendors closing, children hurrying home, engines humming. And in the rhythm, he could feel it. The system he had built was bending. A minor official refused instructions. A shipment rerouted itself. Messages collided, contradicting each other. The pattern, once predictable, now fractured. You've seen this before. The moment when the rules you trusted suddenly don't apply. In a dimly lit cafe, the journalist typed rapidly. Her notes a collage of instinct, observation, and fragments of truth. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is a living organism. And we are all nodes in it. The strategist tapped his fingers against the glass. Lines shifted. Arrows collided. Dots blinked red. Every calculation he had made, now questioned by the smallest human action. You can't control them, he whispered. You can only influence them. And sometimes, that isn't enough. Outside, Caracas pulsed with subtle chaos. Streetlights buzzed. Footsteps echoed. A child laughed in an alley. The storm wasn't outside. It had infiltrated minds. Desire, fear, hope. Every emotion became a variable. Every human act, a force that reshaped the system. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. Alarms whispered. The paradox was undeniable. The very system built to predict chaos was now reshaped by it. A voice on the phone spoke softly, almost casually. They're moving faster than we thought. Every intended outcome now questioned. Every certainty shaken. And he realized. The real danger isn't change. The real danger is believing you can define it. Caracas below breathed. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. And for the first time, he felt it. Recognition. Not defeat. Not fear. But the weight of knowing. Control is temporary. Perception is eternal. The storm had reached its peak. But the true reckoning hadn't even started. Morning broke, but the city didn't exhale. It waited. Every street corner, every alley, every light. All held the echo of last night's invisible storm. He sat in the high-rise, staring at the streets below. Ordinary life moved in ordinary ways. But he could feel the fractures. Vendors haggled. Children laughed. Engines hummed. And yet, everything was different. A shipment had vanished. An official acted against orders. Small, almost imperceptible cracks. But enough to alter the system entirely. You felt this before. The moment when certainty slips. And you realize the world is moving on its own rhythm. A journalist traced the subtle shifts from her cafe. Her pen paused over a page of notes. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is a network of human unpredictability. And every choice matters. The strategist leaned back, letting the tension press into his chest. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. The understanding that control was never absolute. He tapped the glass. Lines shifted. Dots blinked red. Arrows collided. And then he saw it. The moral pressure he had ignored for so long Every choice, every command, every strategy affected people, directly, invisibly, inevitably. Outside, Caracas responded. A minor argument flared at a market. Footsteps echoed in alleys. Streetlights buzzed. A dog barked. The storm had left its mark. Not as destruction, but as awareness. Every ripple carried lessons. Every human act, a spark of revelation. He whispered to himself. You can't predict humanity. You can only recognize it. And somewhere in the city, quietly, people began to notice. Small awakenings. Curiosity. Questions. A subtle shift in perception. The paradox became undeniable. The system designed to shape lives was being reshaped by them. Screens flickered. Messages pinged. The pulse of Caracas beat softly but insistently. And the strategist realized. The storm hadn't ended. It had evolved. Not chaos. Not destruction. But awakening. The real reckoning hadn't even started. By evening, Caracas had shifted again. Not in shape or form, but in awareness. The streets pulsed. The alleys whispered. Even the lights seemed alive. He watched it all from the high rise. Vendors closing stalls. Children darting home. Engines humming in low tones. Everything appeared ordinary. But he could feel the undercurrent. A single misrouted shipment. A minor official ignoring instructions. Messages colliding. A pattern emerging that no one predicted. And here's the part almost no one saw. The system wasn't just a network of rules. It was alive. Responsive. Shaped by every human act. Every hesitation, every question. You've seen this before. That moment when the world seems predictable. And suddenly isn't. He traced the lines on the digital map. Dots blinking red. Arrows intersecting impossibly. Patterns dissolving. The paradox was undeniable. Those who thought they resisted were part of the system. Every act of defiance. Every choice to comply. Reshaped it in ways no algorithm could anticipate. Outside, a journalist typed furiously. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is the pulse of humanity itself. Flowing through every street, every market, every home. He tapped the glass. A streetlight flickered below. A dog barked. Footsteps echoed in alleys. And then he understood. The danger wasn't chaos. The danger wasn't failure. It was believing control was possible. The system he had built to predict life was learning from life itself. A phone vibrated. A voice whispered urgently. They're moving faster than anticipated. Every certainty now questioned. Every calculation fragile. And in that realization, the emotional peak arrived. Not fear. Not panic. But awe. Recognition. The understanding that humanity cannot be contained. That even the most meticulous plan is subordinate to human unpredictability. Caracas pulsed below. Persistent. Adaptive. Alive. And the strategist finally saw it clearly. The storm was not external. It was within every mind. Every act, every choice, every hesitation was part of the system's evolution. The storm had reached its crescendo. And yet, the real reckoning hadn't even started. Dawn arrived slowly. Not as a revelation. Not as a triumph. But as a quiet witness. Caracas stirred. Vendors opened stalls. Children chased soccer balls across cracked sidewalks. Engines hummed. The city breathed. He sat in the high rise. Coffee cold. Eyes tracing streets that seemed unchanged. And yet everything had shifted. You know this feeling. The one that hits after a storm. When silence carries weight. When ordinary sounds feel different. A shipment had been rerouted. A minor official defied instructions. A subtle ripple in the system. One that could alter outcomes for days. The journalist across town paused over her notes. This isn't politics, she wrote again. This is humanity noticing itself. Moving, adapting, questioning. He leaned back, breathing slowly. The storm had passed. Or maybe it had simply transformed. The pressure was still there. Quiet. Persistent. But the realization was clearer. Control is never complete. Perception is eternal. Outside, the city moved in ordinary rhythms. A streetlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. A dog barked. A child laughed. Even in the smallest gestures. Life revealed itself. He traced the invisible lines of consequence again. Each choice, each hesitation. Feeding the system he once thought untouchable. And in that reflection, a subtle hope emerged. The human element, messy, unpredictable, defiant. Was not just a complication. It was the reason the system survived. The reason life endured. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Caracas pulsed softly below. Alive. Persistent. And in that pulse, the first hint of possibility glimmered. Because even after the storm, even after chaos, there is a moment to learn. A moment to act. A moment to begin again. And maybe this was it. The storm had taught its lesson. Not loudly. Not violently. But inevitably. The reckoning was still coming. By mid-afternoon, Caracas was restless again. Not chaotic. Not violent. But alert. Streetlights buzzed faintly. Footsteps echoed across cracked sidewalks. Vendors shouted prices. Engines hummed. He stood at the high-rise window. Tracing streets and alleys as if they were circuits on a complex board. Every move the city made. Every hesitation, every defiance. Was part of a system no one fully understood. A minor shipment had been rerouted. A bureaucrat ignored instructions. A phone call arrived that changed everything. You've seen this before. The moment when the world seems predictable. And then folds in on itself. In a quiet cafe across town, the journalist reread her notes. Patterns were emerging, small, almost imperceptible. Yet monumental when considered together. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life learning its own rhythm. He tapped his fingers against the glass. Lines on the digital map shifted, collided, and rearranged. Arrows blinked red. Dots intersected in ways no algorithm could predict. The paradox was clear. The very system built to control chaos was now evolving with it. Those who resisted were feeding the mechanism. Those who obeyed were still part of the unseen logic. A streetlight flickered. A dog barked. Children laughed in an alley. Every human act. A ripple in the system. Every hesitation. A recalibration. And he realized. The real danger isn't chaos. It isn't failure. It's the illusion of control. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. A convoy stalled unexpectedly. The city adapted quietly. Intelligently, persistently. And the strategist understood, fully. Every plan, every calculation, every manipulation was now subject to life itself. The storm hadn't returned. It had never left. It had only evolved. And somewhere deep inside him, he whispered. What now? Caracas below hummed. Alive. Unpredictable. Persistent. And the real reckoning hadn't even started. Night fell quickly. Not as darkness, but as a weight. Caracas exhaled slowly. Streets alive yet tense. Engines humming, footsteps echoing. Lights flickering across cracked sidewalks. He leaned against the high-rise window. The strategist. The planner. The one who thought control was his domain. And now, he felt the weight of limits pressing in. A minor official had defied orders again. A shipment vanished. Messages collided in ways no one could predict. You think you control the storm, he whispered. But control is an illusion. You can only guide the flow. And hope it obeys. You felt this before. The moment when certainty dissolves. And you realize everything you believed is only a reflection of perception. Outside, the city moved quietly. Children laughed in alleys. Vendors shouted across streets. Engines hummed in low, deliberate tones. A journalist typed furiously in a dim cafe. Patterns were emerging. Not obvious at first. But undeniable when traced carefully. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is humanity asserting itself. Quietly. Persistently. Relentlessly. Lines shifted on the digital map. Dots blinked red. Arrows collided. Every calculation, every plan, every prediction. Now questioned by human unpredictability. The moral pressure was undeniable. Every choice, every command, every strategy touched people in ways unseen. Affecting outcomes no algorithm could predict. A streetlight buzzed. A dog barked. Footsteps echoed in alleys. The storm was no longer outside. It had infiltrated minds. Morality, fear, desire, all collided inside him. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. Alarms whispered. He realized the paradox fully. The system built to control chaos was now learning from it. Those who resisted, those who complied, were all shaping the outcome. Caracas pulsed below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. And he understood finally. The storm wasn't here to destroy. It was here to reveal. And the real reckoning hadn't even started. Dawn arrived slowly. Not with urgency. Not with noise. But as a quiet observer. Caracas stirred. Vendors opened stalls. Children ran across cracked sidewalks. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed softly. He sat in the high rise. Coffee gone cold beside him. Eyes tracing streets that seemed ordinary. But everything had changed. You know this feeling. The calm after the storm. When silence carries weight. When ordinary sounds feel profound. A shipment had been rerouted. A minor official ignored instructions. Ripples traveled unnoticed. Reshaping outcomes in ways no one foresaw. The journalist across town reread her notes. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life noticing itself. Adapting, questioning, evolving. He leaned back, breathing slowly. The storm had passed. Or perhaps it had transformed. The pressure remained. Quiet. Persistent. But the lesson was clear. Control is never complete. Perception is enduring. Outside, Caracas moved in ordinary rhythms. A streetlight flickered. A child laughed. Footsteps echoed. Even in small gestures, life asserted itself. Every act, every hesitation, every choice. Fed the system. Reshaped the plan. Reminded him of what truly mattered. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Caracas pulsed softly below. Alive. Persistent. And in that pulse, possibility glimmered. Because even after the storm, even after chaos, there is a moment to reflect. A moment to act. A moment to begin again. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, the real reckoning hadn't even started. By late afternoon, Caracas hummed with an unusual energy. Not loud. Not obvious. But palpable. Footsteps echoed across cracked sidewalks. Streetlights buzzed. Engines hummed low. Every corner, every alley, seemed to vibrate with possibility and tension. He stood in the high-rise once more, tracing streets like circuits on a vast, unseen network. Every movement in the city below, every hesitation, every deviation, every question, was part of a system no one fully understood. A shipment had been rerouted again. A minor official refused instructions. A phone call arrived that changed everything. The system, once predictable, now pulsed with life. And the realization hit him hard. You cannot control this. Not entirely. Not perfectly. The journalist in a dimly lit cafe across town paused over her notes. Her pen hovered above paper, tracing invisible lines, capturing fragments of a truth that no one could see clearly. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is humanity noticing itself. Responding. Adapting. And it refuses to be contained. The paradox unfolded before him like a living map. Those who resisted were feeding the system. Those who complied were still shaping it. Every human act. Every hesitation. Every whispered doubt. Became part of the invisible machinery. He traced the lines on the digital map again. Dots blinked red. Arrows shifted, collided, and vanished. Patterns emerged, only to dissolve moments later. The pressure built quietly. Not in alarms. Not in sirens. But in every decision he hadn't accounted for. Every choice outside his control. Every human action bending reality in ways he hadn't predicted. A streetlight flickered. A child laughed. Footsteps echoed in alleys. And the realization struck. The human element was not a flaw. It was the engine. It was life itself. He whispered to no one in particular. You think you guide the flow. But sometimes, the flow guides you. Outside, the city responded. The market erupted in a minor argument. A shipment arrived hours late. Voices overlapped in plazas and streets. A dog barked in the distance. The air carried tension, subtle, persistent, alive. Every misstep, every act of defiance, every accidental choice created ripples. Ripples that reshaped outcomes. Ripples that questioned certainty. Ripples that reminded him. Even the most meticulous system cannot escape humanity. Messages pinged on screens. Arrows blinked red. Calculations failed to reconcile the new variables. And he understood finally. The storm hadn't left. It had evolved. Not chaos. Not destruction. But intelligence. Adaptive. Unpredictable. Human. The paradox was impossible to ignore. The system he had built to predict and control was now learning from life itself. Caracas pulsed below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. And somewhere deep within him, he whispered. The storm is not here to destroy. It's here to reveal. The city waited, patient and relentless. Every heartbeat of its people. Every small act. A question, a challenge, a lesson. And he realized, finally. No matter how carefully you plan. No matter how meticulously you calculate. The truth of life is this. The human element always finds a way. And the real reckoning hadn't even started. Night had fully descended over Caracas. The city exhaled slowly. But the pulse beneath the streets was alive, electric, insistent, unrelenting. Footsteps echoed in narrow alleys. Streetlights flickered against the cracked pavement. Engines hummed low, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Somewhere, a dog barked. A child laughed in the distance. He stood again at the high-rise window, tracing the streets as if reading a living map. Every movement below. Every hesitation, every whisper, every defiance. Shifted the system. Every human act, intended or accidental, was now part of a logic he could not fully control. A shipment was delayed again. A minor official ignored instructions. A phone call arrived that changed everything. And suddenly, the lines he had drawn so carefully began to collapse. You know this feeling. That moment when certainty slips. And you realize the world is moving beyond your grasp. The journalist across town paused in her notes. Her pen trembling slightly over the paper. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life asserting itself. Unpredictable, relentless. And impossible to contain. He tapped the glass. Dots blinked red on the digital map. Arrows collided, disappeared, reappeared. Patterns shifted, reshaped, dissolved. The logic he thought immutable was fracturing under the pressure of the human element. A streetlight buzzed. Voices overlapped in the plazas below. Footsteps echoed. Engines hummed. Every act, every hesitation, every decision was a ripple reshaping the network. And he realized. The storm was not outside. It was inside. Inside minds. Inside hearts. Inside the logic of the system he had once thought unbreakable. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question, he whispered. The paradox revealed itself. Those who resisted were still feeding the system. Those who complied were still shaping it. Every act of human unpredictability, every ripple, was rewriting reality. A shipment rerouted itself. Messages collided. Alarms whispered in the background. The city moved as if alive. Adaptive. Persistent. Relentless. He traced the invisible lines in the air, imagining moves yet to be made. And in that moment, a stark truth pressed upon him. No plan survives contact with humanity. No strategy can fully anticipate life. Every calculation, every manipulation, is subordinate to the living, breathing system below. Caracas pulsed. Alive. Unpredictable. Persistent. And he understood fully. The storm was not here to break him. It was here to reveal him. To reveal humanity. To reveal truth. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city hummed in quiet insistence. And somewhere, deep in the night, he whispered again. The system is not broken. It is alive. It is human. And the real reckoning hasn't even started. Dawn returned slowly over Caracas. Not with fanfare. Not with clarity. But as a quiet witness to what had unfolded. The city stirred. Vendors opened stalls. Children darted across cracked sidewalks. Laughing. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed softly. The ordinary carried an extraordinary weight. He sat in the high rise. Coffee gone cold. Maps and screens before him. Dots blinking red, lines colliding, arrows shifting. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet everything had shifted. You felt this before. That calm after the storm. When silence presses on you. And you realize nothing is ever the same. A shipment had been rerouted. A minor official ignored instructions. Messages collided, subtly rewriting the logic of the system. And the city moved quietly, persistently, adapting. The journalist across town traced her notes. Patterns emerging, dissolving, and re-emerging in the subtle rhythms of life. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is humanity noticing itself. Adapting, evolving. And refusing to be contained. He leaned back in his chair. The storm had passed, or transformed. The pressure remained. Quiet but insistent. The realization was clear. Control is temporary. Perception is eternal. The human element is life itself. Outside, Caracas breathed. A streetlight flickered. A child laughed in an alley. Footsteps echoed. A dog barked. Every ordinary sound carried the weight of consequence. Every minor act had become part of the network. Reshaping outcomes in ways no algorithm could predict. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Caracas pulsed softly below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. And in that pulse, possibility glimmered. The strategist traced invisible lines in the air. Thinking of all the moves yet to be made. All the choices yet to unfold. He understood, finally. The storm was not destruction. It was revelation. It had revealed limits. It had revealed truth. It had revealed humanity. Screens flickered. Messages pinged. The city responded quietly, persistently. A shipment had been rerouted. A minor official ignored instructions. Messages collided, subtly rewriting the logic of the system. And the city moved quietly, persistently, adapting. The journalist across town traced her notes. Patterns emerging, dissolving, and re-emerging in the subtle rhythms of life. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is humanity noticing itself. Adapting, evolving. And refusing to be contained. He leaned back in his chair. The storm had passed, or transformed. The pressure remained. Quiet but insistent. The realization was clear. Control is temporary. Perception is eternal. The human element is life itself. Outside, Caracas breathed. A streetlight flickered. A child laughed in an alley. Footsteps echoed. A dog barked. Every ordinary sound carried the weight of consequence. Every minor act had become part of the network. Reshaping outcomes in ways no algorithm could predict. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Caracas pulsed softly below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. And in that pulse, possibility glimmered. The strategist traced invisible lines in the air. Thinking of all the moves yet to be made. All the choices yet to unfold. He understood, finally. The storm was not destruction. It was revelation. It had revealed limits. It had revealed truth. It had revealed humanity. Screens flickered. Messages pinged. The city responded quietly, persistently. It's humanity noticing itself. Responding. Questioning. learning. And it refuses to be contained. He traced invisible lines in the air, imagining moves yet to be made. Arrows collided. Dots blinked red. Patterns emerged, then fractured again. The paradox was undeniable. Those who resisted were part of the system. Those who complied were still shaping it. Every human act, intentional or accidental. Every hesitation, every whisper, every choice was rewriting reality itself. A streetlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. Children laughed. Voices overlapped. He whispered quietly, almost to himself. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. The storm was not outside. It had been inside all along. Inside minds, hearts, choices. Within the very logic of the system. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city moved as if alive. Persistent. Adaptive. Relentless. And he understood fully. The storm had not come to destroy. It had come to reveal. To reveal limits. To reveal truth. To reveal humanity itself. Even the smallest human act. Every hesitation, every decision, every whisper was part of the evolution of the system. And that evolution was unstoppable. Caracas pulsed below. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. He breathed deeply. Letting the enormity of it settle into his chest. The pressure of understanding. The weight of human unpredictability. The awe of life asserting itself in ways no plan could anticipate. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You know this feeling. You've seen it before. You've lived it, even if only for a moment. And in that moment, the city, the system, the people, all waited together. Because even after the storm, even after chaos, there is a moment to learn. A moment to act. A moment to begin again. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? The reckoning hadn't even started. And maybe that is the point. The city flickered in the night. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Children laughed. Ordinary life, extraordinary consequence. The pulse of humanity, unstoppable, uncontainable, alive. And somewhere, deep in that quiet, truth whispered softly. Everything begins again. The city never truly sleeps. Caracas breathes in rhythms imperceptible to the untrained eye. Engines hum low in the distance. Footsteps echo in alleys, fading and returning like waves. Streetlights flicker, casting shadows that move with their own will. Somewhere, a child laughs. Somewhere, a dog barks. Ordinary life. Extraordinary consequences. He stands again, high above the streets. Looking down at the network of human motion. Vendors closing stalls. Shadows stretching across sidewalks. Every ordinary gesture. An invisible thread in the fabric of the system. The shipment that vanished last night has arrived. A minor official defied orders again. Messages pinged, collided, and reshaped outcomes in ways no calculation could predict. The system was alive. Breathing. Learning. You felt this before. That unsettling realization. That the world moves beyond your control. That life is alive. And human unpredictability is not a flaw. It is its engine. The journalist sits in a quiet cafe, pen hovering over the page. This isn't politics, she writes. This is humanity learning itself. Asserting itself. Adapting. And refusing to be contained. The strategist exhales slowly. Not in defeat. Not in fear. But in recognition, the weight of limits presses in. And yet, there is clarity in understanding. Control is never absolute. Perception endures. The storm that has been raging, inside and outside, was not meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. Revealing what, exactly? Truth. Humanity. The delicate tension between order and chaos. The fragile beauty of unpredictability. Caracas moves below him. Alive. Persistent. Unpredictable. Every footstep, every laugh, every gesture. Shaping reality in ways no one can anticipate. He whispers quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain life itself. The city's pulse echoes in his chest. Screens flicker. Messages ping. The rhythm of life unfolds. A story larger than any individual. Larger than any plan. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You know this feeling. You've lived it. You've carried it in moments of quiet defiance. And moments of revelation. Somewhere in the city, someone chooses differently. Somewhere, a choice shifts the pattern. Every ripple counts. Every act matters. And the system evolves. Not by orders. But by life itself. The night stretches on. Footsteps fade. Engines hum. Streetlights flicker. Children dream. And somewhere, deep in the pulse of the city, truth whispers softly. Everything begins again. Always. Unstoppable. Human. The reckoning has only just begun. And perhaps, that is the point. To learn, to act, to awaken. To understand that life cannot be controlled. Only witnessed, honored, and engaged with. And maybe, this is where the story truly starts. The first light of dawn touched Caracas slowly. Softly, almost apologetically. Not a blaze. Not a revelation. But a quiet herald of what had been. And what was to come. The city moved, breathing through its ordinary motions. Vendors arranged goods with meticulous care. Children darted through alleys, chasing laughter that carried unseen weight. Engines hummed in low tones. Footsteps echoed across cracked streets. The rhythm was subtle. But insistently alive. He stood in the high-rise once more. Leaning against glass that reflected the faint light. The system, his system, was no longer a machine. Not fully. It was alive. Learning. Adapting. A minor official defied orders. A shipment rerouted itself. Messages collided in ways impossible to predict. The city, and its people, had become a force he could not anticipate. And it was beautiful. You felt this before. The pulse of life when you realize. The world is larger than your design. Wilder than your calculations. And infinitely more human. The journalist sat in her quiet cafe, pen suspended over paper. Capturing fragments of a story that no one else could yet see. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life asserting itself. Relentless. Adaptive. Uncontainable. He exhaled slowly. Letting the weight of insight settle in his chest. The storm had never been external. It had always lived inside minds. Inside choices, inside human unpredictability. The system had taught him a lesson. You cannot control life. You can only witness it. You can only respond. You can only honor it. Caracas pulsed below. Alive, persistent, unpredictable. Every action, every hesitation, every whisper. A ripple reshaping reality itself. Even the smallest choice mattered. Every human act, intentional or accidental. Was part of a greater logic beyond comprehension. A streetlight flickered. A dog barked. Children laughed. Voices overlapped. Footsteps echoed in alleys. He whispered softly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city moved like a living organism. Persistent. Adaptive. Relentless. And in the quiet, the truth crystallized. The storm had not come to destroy. It had come to reveal. To reveal limits. To reveal truth. To reveal humanity itself. Even the smallest human act. Every hesitation, every decision, every whispered doubt. Was part of an unstoppable evolution. And that evolution was life itself. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You've felt this before. You've seen it. You've lived it. Somewhere, a choice shifts the pattern. Somewhere, a ripple reshapes the network. The system learns. The city adapts. Life persists. The night stretches, fading into dawn. Engines hum. Footsteps echo. Streetlights flicker. Children dream. And the final whisper of truth carries across the city. Everything begins again. Always. Unstoppable. Human. The reckoning has only just begun. And perhaps, this story, was never about control. It was about awareness. Choice. And the enduring pulse of humanity. The city waits. The people move. And somewhere, quietly, everything begins again. Night draped over Caracas like a velvet curtain. Soft yet heavy. The city breathed in silent rhythms. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed in narrow alleys. Streetlights flickered across cracked sidewalks. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet carrying the weight of invisible consequences. He stood once more in the high rise. Tracing streets like circuits on a living map. Every movement below. Every hesitation, every defiance. Was now part of a system that had become alive. Adaptive, and impossible to predict. A shipment had been rerouted yet again. Minor officials acted against instructions. Messages collided in ways no one could foresee. The city pulsed quietly, insistently, unpredictably. You felt this before. That tension in your chest. When you realize the world is larger than your calculations. Wilder than your plans. And infinitely more human. The journalist, in her quiet cafe, watched shadows stretch across tables. Her pen hovered over notes she barely understood herself. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life asserting itself. Relentless. Adaptive. Uncontainable. And it refuses to be constrained by any single mind. He exhaled slowly. Letting insight press heavy in his chest. The storm had never been external. It had been inside choices, inside hesitation, inside human unpredictability. He understood finally. Control is an illusion. Perception is eternal. The system is alive. Because humanity is alive. Caracas pulsed below. Persistent. Adaptive. Unstoppable. Every human act, intentional or accidental. Every hesitation, every whisper. Was a ripple reshaping reality itself. Every ripple mattered. Every small choice carried weight. A streetlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. Engines hummed. Children laughed. Voices overlapped. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain life itself. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city moved like a living organism. Persistent. Adaptive. Relentless. And then he understood fully. The storm was not destruction. It was revelation. It revealed limits. It revealed truth. It revealed humanity itself. Even the smallest human act. Every hesitation, every decision. Every whispered doubt. Was part of an unstoppable evolution. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You've felt this before. You've lived it. You've seen it. Somewhere, a single choice shifted the pattern. Somewhere, a ripple reshaped the network. The system evolved. The city adapted. Life persisted. The night stretched into dawn. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Streetlights flickered. Children dreamed. And in that quiet, truth whispered across the city. Everything begins again. Always. Unstoppable. Human. The reckoning has only just begun. And perhaps the story was never about control. It was about awareness. Choice. And the enduring pulse of humanity. He looked down at the city. And for the first time, understood the grandest truth of all. We are all part of the system. We are all the storm. And we are all the calm that follows. Everything begins again. Always. And in that, everything lives. Dawn was breaking, but it was slow, almost reluctant. Caracas stirred beneath a sky streaked with amber and gray. The city exhaled quietly. Yet every corner, every alley, every flickering streetlight seemed alive. Watching, listening, waiting. Footsteps echoed. Engines hummed. Vendors opened stalls. Children ran across cracked sidewalks, their laughter carrying weight beyond understanding. A dog barked in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet each sound carried ripples, unseen. Reshaping a network no one fully understood. He stood in the high-rise once more. Leaning against glass that reflected a world he could no longer control. Maps, screens, blinking dots, shifting lines. The system he had once believed to be entirely predictable was alive. Learning. Adapting. Defiant. A shipment had vanished. Minor officials had acted against instructions. Messages collided, creating consequences too subtle to notice. But too powerful to ignore. The city itself had become a living organism. Resistant to prediction, resilient to manipulation. You felt this before. The pulse of life that cannot be contained. The hum of unpredictability that defies your calculations. The whisper of human will that insists upon existing. Even when every system tries to shape it. The journalist across town scribbled furiously in a dim cafe. Patterns emerged, dissolved, and reformed in her notes. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life asserting itself. Relentless. Adaptive. And utterly uncontainable. He exhaled. The storm had never been outside. It had lived inside every choice, every hesitation, every human act. He realized. Control is an illusion. Perception is eternal. Humanity is alive. And life itself is unpredictable. Caracas pulsed below. Every act, intentional or accidental. Every whisper, every hesitation. Was a ripple reshaping reality. The smallest choices carried infinite consequence. A streetlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. Children laughed. Engines hummed. He whispered. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain humanity itself. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city moved as if alive. Persistent. Adaptive. Relentless. And then it became clear. The storm was never meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. To reveal limits. To reveal truth. To reveal the human element itself. Even the smallest act, every decision, every hesitation, was part of a system evolving beyond comprehension. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You know this feeling. You've lived it. You've seen it unfold in quiet moments of defiance. And in small acts of courage. Somewhere, a single choice shifted everything. Somewhere, a ripple transformed reality. The system learned. The city adapted. Life persisted. The night stretched into dawn. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Streetlights flickered. Children dreamed. And in that quiet, truth whispered across the city. Everything begins again. Always. Unstoppable. Human. The reckoning has only just begun. And perhaps, the story was never about control. It was about awareness. Choice. And the enduring pulse of humanity. He looked down at the city. And finally understood the grandest truth. We are all part of the system. We are all the storm. We are all the calm that follows. Everything begins again. Always. And somewhere, beyond sight, beyond time, life waits. Persistent, adaptive, unstoppable. For the next choice. For the next ripple. For the next beginning. The sky over Caracas was pale with early light. Like a canvas stretched too thin. Brushing orange and gray across rooftops and cracked streets. The city stirred quietly. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Vendors opened stalls. Children ran, laughed, and chased shadows. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Extraordinary meaning. He stood once more in the high rise. Looking down at a city alive with unpredictability. The system he thought he controlled was no longer a machine. It was alive. Adaptive. Persistent. Human. A shipment had vanished. Minor officials had defied instructions. Messages collided, reshaping reality in subtle but unstoppable ways. You felt this before. That quiet tension. The awareness that the world is always larger than your plans. Wilder than your predictions. And infinitely more human. The journalist across town scribbled in her dim cafe. Capturing fragments of a story too vast to fully comprehend. This isn't politics, she wrote. This is life asserting itself. Relentless. Adaptive. Uncontainable. He exhaled slowly. Letting insight settle like gravity in his chest. The storm had never been outside. It had lived in choices, in hesitation, in the pulse of human unpredictability. Control was an illusion. Perception endured. Life, in all its chaos and order, was alive. Caracas pulsed below. Every act, intentional or accidental. Every hesitation, every whisper, was a ripple reshaping reality itself. The smallest gesture carried infinite consequence. A streetlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. Children laughed. Engines hummed. He whispered quietly. You cannot stop the mind that questions. You cannot suppress awareness. You cannot contain life itself. Screens flashed. Messages pinged. The city moved like a living organism. Persistent. Adaptive. Relentless. And the truth became undeniable. The storm was never meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. To reveal limits. To reveal truth. To reveal humanity itself. Even the smallest human act, every hesitation, every decision, every whispered doubt, was part of a system evolving beyond comprehension. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. You've felt this before. You've lived it. You've seen it unfold in moments of quiet defiance. In small acts of courage. And in choices that shifted reality. Somewhere, a single decision reshaped everything. Somewhere, a ripple transformed outcomes. The system learned. The city adapted. Life persisted. Night stretched into dawn. Engines hummed. Footsteps echoed. Streetlights flickered. Children dreamed. And in the quiet, truth whispered across the city. Everything begins again. Always. Unstoppable. Human. The reckoning has only just begun. And perhaps, the story was never about control. It was about awareness. Choice. And the enduring pulse of humanity. He looked down at the city. Finally understanding the grandest truth. We are all part of the system. We are all the storm. We are all the calm that follows. Everything begins again. Always. And beyond sight, beyond time. Life waits, persistent, adaptive, unstoppable. For the next choice. For the next ripple. For the next beginning. And in that moment, the city, the system, humanity itself, all converged in a single, quiet, undeniable truth. Nothing ends. Everything evolves. And life is unstoppable.